Time for us to look into our crystal balls and think about what 2013-14 has to offer for a trio of Big Ten teams. As Michigan State looks toward next season, they do so without the graduating Derek Nix and his what, Shon?
Roaster.
The roaster is gone. And while Nix departs, it's now decision time for both the vastly improved Adrian Payne and Big Ten Freshman of the Year Gary Harris, both of whom will no doubt garner interest from the NBA. Well, Shon, we cannot exactly predict if these guys are going to be back in East Lansing or in the NBA come June, come July. But how good do you think this Michigan team could actually be next season if the likes of Payne and Harris all do decide to return to campus?
If Payne and Harris come back, it looks like Keith Appling is coming back. You're also going to have Brandon Dawson in the mix. That is a team that can compete not just for the Big Ten championship, but for the national championship, particularly with the way that Payne has developed his game. He's shown the ability to step out and knock down jump shots. He's an outstanding free throw shooter, Tim, and his versatility just makes him so difficult on both ends of the floor. He can score with his back to the basket, he can face up, and he blocks a lot of shots, alters more, and has become a better passer. Now, they're going to miss Derek Nix because he really provided that inside consistent presence, but with the potential backcourt returning and the continued development of Adrian Payne, this is a team to keep an eye on.
100% right. I think the Spartans could win it all if all these guys come back to school. And I've watched Adrian Payne work out as far as with coaches and one-on-one. And if he goes to any draft combines, he is going to be super impressive because he has long arms, he's a great athlete. More importantly, he has an unbelievable motor. And he's got a soft touch. And Gary Harris is going to be the most interesting thing because this NBA draft, all the experts are saying that this is a very weak draft. And we saw as this season goes on, Gary Harris got improved play. He's a knockdown shooter. He's super smooth. Only time will tell, but these two guys are going to be very valuable pieces if the Spartans are going to move forward.
Always seems to be a spot at the next level for a guy who consistently knock down 18, 19, and 20-foot jumpers. As for Ohio State, the official departure list in Columbus is awfully short. That's where Evan Ravenel is the only impact player who's actually out of eligibility. Had a very nice finish to his final season. But of course, there's also Deshaun Thomas, DT, the Big Ten's leading scorer, who will have to decide for a second straight year between another season at OSU and a paycheck in the NBA. Now, Tim, regardless of what Thomas does, think about the nucleus that returns for Thad Matta, Aaron Kraft, Lenzel Smith, Shannon Scott, Sam Thompson. All these guys will be back in Columbus. The big question, will Thomas join them?
Well, Thomas is the straw that stirs that drink. And just looking from afar, you'd say, well, the leading scorer in arguably the best conference in the country, well, this would be a no-brainer. He more than likely would move forward with his career. But problem is, Shon, what is his position in the pros? And I'll be honest, I'm not a great evaluator of, is a guy's game going to translate from college to the NBA? He's an explosive scorer, but his handle needs improvement. And more importantly, who is he going to guard at that next level?
I think that's the real key question, whether it's next year or the year after. Who does he guard on the other team's roster? You know, he's shown the ability. He's become a better defender. He's far from an elite defender. But regardless of what Deshaun Thomas does, Ohio State is going to be very, very good next year. You went through the roster. One name that was kind of left out was LaQuentin Ross and his continued evolution offensively. This is a team that will be stacked. If Deshaun Thomas comes back, they'll be up there challenging again because of what they do defensively with Michigan State, again, with all those unknowns.
Leaving LaQuentin Ross out of this discussion with Sean Morris on the other end of the desk, huge mistake.
I actually saw him tear up a little bit when we didn't mention his name because we all know if Morris could adopt LaQuentin Ross, you would.
I'll tell you again. You know why? His school's paid for it. Problem solved.
No cash out of Sean Morris's pocket. As for Indiana, the Hoosiers say goodbye to a senior class who has been through it all. Not only Derek Elston and Christian Watford, but also guys like Jordan Hulls. He played more games in a Hoosier uniform than anyone else, offered leadership. Now, Watford offered that inside-outside game, but the bigger questions in Bloomington revolve around Cody Zeller, who has eligibility left, as does Victor Oladipo, a guy who is a finalist for National Player of the Year, and a guy who, without argument, was the most improved player in the nation over the past 2 years, from a role player to a National Player of the Year finalist. This is really a transition year for Indiana.
Yeah, it really is. You talked about Hulls and Watford. They're going to graduate and move on. If you're Oladipo and Zeller, you're taking a look at a number of different things. You talked about the the improvement of Victor Oladipo and as well as Cody Zeller. One thing, it's a perverse thing, it's part of the world we live in now, Tim. The longer you stay in school, it gives people at the proverbial next level chances to poke hole in your games. And rather than focus on what guys do, they spend an inordinate amount of time on focusing on what they can't do. So I'm sure that's going to factor into any decisions those two guys make.
Well, you can't argue. I think no one in all of college basketball raised their stock more throughout this college season than Victor Oladipo. So I think his worth maybe is at his highest right now. And for Cody Zeller, I think he's another guy who's going to evaluate this draft class. As I've said this before, the draft class is pretty weak. And when you have a 7-footer that runs the floor that well, has soft touch, rebounds the ball extremely well, right, Shon, he sticks around a while. People are going to say, well, he can't do this, he can't do that. Well, there are some things he can do, and that's win games.
He can run the floor, he can score, he's shown a great degree of toughness. The one thing you would like to see him do is maybe improve his release point on his shots. It seems to me he's releasing a lot of shots around his chin, but the upside on this guy, whether it's next year or down the road, is tremendous because of how he can run the floor and his competitive streak.
And the question for Oladipo, what position at the next level? Doesn't quite have the handle to be a 1. Does he have the consistent outside shooting to be a 2? A question to perhaps be answered with one more year in Bloomington. We shall see.